Hi, I'm Shan Wu with an undercolor of law hot take on the DOJ special counsel case against Hunter Biden. This is going to be the first of what, in my opinion, is two completely unjustified prosecutions brought against President Biden's only surviving son, Hunter Biden. This first one up is the gun case, and the second one will be the tax case. So it's worth remembering the sad genesis of this embarrassment for DOJ, which is that after nearly a half decade of investigating by the same prosecutor, David Weiss, the U.S. Attorney for Delaware, he finally came up with a plea bargain, which was supposed to happen last July. And that plea bargain was for Hunter Biden to plead guilty to two misdemeanors for tax evasion, taxes he has paid already before he's going to plead guilty. And on this gun charge that's going to trial, he was going to get diversion. And we'll talk about the tax issue in a little bit, but the gun charge is based on a failure to tell the truth on the registration form. And the failure to tell the truth was he was a drug addict at that time that he bought the gun. Diversion was supposed to be the outcome of that. And diversion is a term that literally means diverting from a normal prosecution. Typically, you divert to a different track, such as drug treatment, gun safety, possibly in this case, alcohol abuse. It may include counseling, community service. The idea is that the nature and facts of a particular case don't warrant a full criminal prosecution or criminal conviction. So you divert it from that path to give the defendant a chance to rehabilitate themselves, get treatment, and they won't have a criminal conviction. For this kind of gun charge, it's actually quite rare to actually prosecute this type of sort of administrative violation. And the reason for that is usually when the person is a drug addict or they're abusing a substance, they're not really thinking that clearly. So it's not that great of a deterrent to expect that convicting people for this means other people who are under the influence of drugs or a drug addict are going to remember, oh, I can't lie about that. It's just not a very effective way of deterring people. Now, as has been documented in a lot of research and articles, it is very rare to actually prosecute this kind of case. And the plea bargain would have taken care of this in an appropriate fashion, which is diversion, very common. But the plea bargain broke down. It's been a while, so let's review why. It broke down because of ineptitude on the part of the prosecution, as I pointed out in an article in the Daily Beast. We'll put that up for you. Because what happened was, in a high-profile case like this, if you're the prosecutor, you really want to make sure you've got all your bases covered and you know exactly what the offer is to the defendant. So when the judge asked, is this going to take care of any other potential charges that might, currently be known to the government? The answer should have been yes. Certainly Hunter Biden's attorneys expected it to be yes. But instead, DOJ started to hem and haw, saying, there might be a FARA, which is a Foreign Registrations Agent Act violation. Apparently, perhaps thinking about all that nonsense that's on the famous laptop about foreign influences, the judge rightfully insisted there needs to be clarity. Can Biden still be prosecuted for something else after this guilty plea? So the whole thing crashed and burned in a very humiliating fashion in open court for the prosecutor, DOJ at that time. And what was really silly about that is, sure, plea deals break down in court, usually because the defendant does not want to admit what happened. That wasn't the case here. Hunter Biden has been more than happy to admit what he had done wrong. What you do normally, though, is you go back to the negotiating table. You fix it usually that day. But instead, what happened was the prosecutor, David Weiss, who later became a special counsel, Garland appointed him to that, he took the reaction to that plea bargain breaking down, as well as his reaction to an enormous amount of pressure from the right saying this was some kind of sweetheart deal for Hunter Biden. Everything was being fixed to help President Biden. And so he took the position of then really punishing Biden for their own ineptitude by then indicting him on this gun charge, which almost no one gets indicted for, as well as the tax charge. Now, that's also sort of embarrassing because criminal tax charges usually don't get brought if the person has paid their taxes. Like, it's sort of a civil type thing, which is you need to pay what you owe along with penalties. Then, to compound things, David Weiss was made a special counsel by Attorney General Merrick Garland, which actually violates the special counsel regulations. Point of those regulations is for DOJ to appoint someone outside the department to prosecute when there's a conflict of interest. Usually that means the target, potential defendant, is somebody high up in the executive branch. DOJ is part of the executive branch, so it's kind of a conflict to have it investigate itself. Now, the problem here is Hunter Biden is not in the executive branch. He holds no position there, so there's no need to use a special counsel to investigate him. Moreover, it's the same guy, David Weiss, who's been doing it for almost a half decade's been looking at him, and finally had this plea deal. It collapsed. Now he gets made special counsel? Well, supposedly it was because Weiss needed to have the special counsel title to bring the case in California, I think for the gun charge, and then there's the Delaware tax case. That really wasn't necessary. Merrick Garland could have simply extended his authority as a DOJ employee to take on both cases. The other problem, or the way that it violated the special counsel regs, which we'll put up for you too here, is that they call for someone outside of DOJ to do the prosecution. I mean, that makes sense, right? It's a conflict of interest. So you wouldn't have someone within DOJ do it. You look to someone outside the department. You remember Mueller? He was from outside the department because he no longer was working for DOJ. Even Robert Hur, who was the special counsel for President Biden's investigation, former DOJ, but at the time he became special counsel, he was no longer within DOJ. So that brings us now to the indictment and the trial that's going to start. It's a little unclear exactly what the defense is going to be, because it's pretty hard to mount a defense against the fact that he was using drugs at the time and he lied on that form. But what I think we can expect is that unlike Trump's defense team, Biden's defense team is going to have a very coherent counter-narrative with very specific themed attacks on what the prosecution puts forward. Now, we won't know till we see it, but I would expect one of the real vulnerabilities for the prosecution is any evidence from the infamous Hunter Biden's laptop. Why is that an area of vulnerability? That is an enormously tainted piece of evidence. With forensic evidence, the chain of custody, meaning who has handled it, is really important to establish that the evidence is pristine, it hasn't been corrupted, hasn't been manipulated by anybody. In this case, this laptop seems to have been handled by literally dozens of people from the time it was in that, wherever it was, the repair shop. Tons of people have allegedly extracted evidence from it. Lord knows how many people have really looked at it. As a former prosecutor, I think it's laughable that you would even attempt to authenticate it through experts. Now, of course, they'll have to. They'll have to say that it's authentic. They have said that already. The material they're going to use has sufficient integrity in the chain of custody. But you really have to question how much of the history is going to come out and whether a jury is really going to believe that there can be that much history to this one piece of evidence where there's not a good chain of custody for them to believe that what's on it is reliable. Very much hanging over this case is going to be the concept of jury nullification, which is that the jury might insist on not convicting. They would nullify the strong evidence in the case. And again, I think the evidence is going to be very easy. He was on drugs. He lied about it. He bought a gun. They may nullify that because a skillful defense counsel can bring out the fact that there seems to be selective prosecution, not the legal attack on selective prosecution, but can make it appear to the jury as it isn't fair that this case was brought. Feeding into that is going to be the prosecution bringing out, which they have to, the fact that Biden was a drug addict at that time. They're going to bring out all these embarrassing things about Hunter Biden, possibly even photos, to make it very obvious, text messages, that he was using drugs at that time. Very embarrassing, humiliating stuff. To some extent, they have to bring it out to prove he was a drug addict. But if they go overboard on that point, or if on appeal you can argue that they went overboard, then an appellate court may find that this type of information was more prejudicial than probative. Meaning it's not this totally irrelevant, but if you overdo it, it may come across as, oh, you might have just tainted him, made him look like a bad person, and that's why they convicted him, rather than the actual evidence about the narrow charge. So if that happens here, if there is a conviction, there's this nullification, if there's a conviction, there's a possibility of there being too much prejudicial evidence. But you might not get the conviction because it is quite possible that the jury is going to see this case for what it is, that it's an unfair prosecution. It's selective. Now, I told you I'd talk about the legal concept of selective prosecution. They already raised that for defense, and the trial judge rejected it. That's the notion that as compared to other similarly situated people, this person got selected for the prosecution. That's the legal argument. But as a nullification matter, that sort of atmosphere sits over the whole case if you can bring that out. The way you bring it out, you point out all the things that Biden has admitted to in various ways. He's not hiding the fact that he was on drugs then. When you put that out strongly, raises a question in the juror's mind, why is the prosecution doing this? Why are they going after that? Similarly, in the tax case, he's already paid back the taxes. It's very rare to prosecute someone when they've already done that. All of this adds up to a picture of somebody being prosecuted for who they are, not for what they did. And that's going to be the real challenge for the special counsel in this case, prosecuting Hunter Biden. And if he gets a conviction, which I think is pretty likely, that's going to be the real challenge on appeal too, is having navigated through that minefield of evidence and excessively prejudicial information. So that's it for now. I look forward to hearing your comments as always, and it really helps me think about what to talk about and how to talk about it. Thanks. See you soon.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram @MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.